Peace and welcome to the culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii Muhammad. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the conversation. Folks, we got a lot to talk about. First and foremost, let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the killer of Jordan Neely. This is Daniel Penny. This is the gentleman who killed the black man on the New York City subway train. He has decided to plead not guilty in the murder. We'll have a little bit of the latest around that. Also, the Supreme Court votes against a controversial theory that may be insignificant now, but may be a huge factor in the 2024 election. We'll be checking in with our sister Suzette Speaks, our attorney, to break it down for us. Later on, I talk about the evolution of hip-hop 50 years later, checking in with legendary DJ Navs to talk about how he plans to show the culture is still alive and well. And then later, Dwayne Wade finally had admitted that when his daughter came out of the closet to say that that she was transgender, that she hid from the athlete and what that caused him to do as a father. So we'll have that conversation and a whole lot more. So stay with us. It's all happening on today's edition of The Culture here on the Black Star Network. Let's go. All right, folks, welcome to the culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii Muhammad. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of the conversation. Folks, we got a lot to talk about, so let's jump right in. And, of course, it's Wednesday. I'm going to be joined in a few moments by my sister Suzette Speaks, host of Suzette Speaks on the program on YouTube. And also, she is an attorney out of Florida to share her insight and break some things down for us. But today, folks, we got a lot to talk about. First and foremost, I want to talk about what's going on in the case of Jordan Neely. This is the black man who was killed while being in the chokehold on the New York City subway by a former Marine veteran by the name of Daniel Penny. Mr. Penny decided to, as he was charged in the death of the homeless black man, Jordan Neely, he decided to plead not guilty to charges of second-degree manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide during a court appearance. Here's the latest. Check it out from CNN. I want to share with you just a little bit more of the details of what this means for Daniel Penny. According to CNN, the Marine veteran has pleaded not guilty to charges of second-degree manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide as he went into court. Penny, and I'm looking here at the second paragraph, folks, Penny, who is white, only spoke to say, quote, not guilty when asked for his plea at the hearing, which lasted less than 5 minutes. The 24-year-old was indicted by a grand jury this month in the May 1st death of 30-year-old Jordan Neely. He is due back in court on October 25th. Penny surrendered to police in May and has been out on a $100,000 bond. The bail conditions were not changed during Wednesday's hearing. All right, so I want to talk to our sister Suzette Speaks, who's an attorney to give us some insight around this. First and foremost, Suzette, good to see you again, sis. How you been?
Man, I miss everybody. It's great to be back. Big up to the culture crew. We in here, Miami represent. Let's go.
Right. Hot Miami, that it is, right? All right, so we're going to just tap into your attorney side of things here, Suzette. What does this mean? Daniel Penny is out on bail, $100,000, but by him pleading not guilty to second-degree manslaughter and being criminally negligent homicide, how does this play out? What does that mean?
Well, looking at these facts, and again, hey, everybody, I've missed everyone. Great to be back. Looking at this case, we have to remember this happened just in May. And as you guys may remember, the video that Farajii just alluded to where the Michael Jackson impersonator, Mr. Jordan Neely, was on the train underground in a subway in New York. And at this moment, which is captured on video, we don't see what precipitated this moment, but we see him, engaging with the accused Daniel Penny. So Mr. Penny's legal team obviously is very confident that they believe that they can at least make the argument to a jury that his behavior was reasonable. Now, many of us who are looking at that video would argue quite differently. To see that a man would take a life in this way was quite shocking to many in the American public. So it says a lot that his legal team wants to kind of ride this legal theory that he did this in trying to protect the public, his fellow passengers, and himself. So it's going to be interesting to see what they argue as we get into next the trial dates and opening statements, etc. But it shows that he's pretty confident that he believes a jury can be persuaded that he acted reasonably under the circumstances.
So this is really based upon. I mean, it's not an open and close type of case. It's like based upon intention. Is that what I'm understanding from you, Suzette?
Yeah, absolutely. He's facing 15 years if convicted. And right now he's out on bond, as you mentioned, $100,000 bond. So he's going to school, according to his attorney statements that they've made in news conferences, that he has been really affected by the press coverage. Actually, yes, a lot of people have been affected, but it was due to your actions, sir, on this fateful day. So the theory that I kind of am interested in what the defense presents is around what happened prior to what we see on video. I think sometimes when that camera starts rolling, you get the information kind of in bits and pieces, and I can compare it to a couple other cases that we see right now that are popular in the social media zeitgeist, but we don't know what leads up to this. So the witness testimony specifically from other passengers, witness statements, people who were just there watching, again, that also kind of rubbed a lot of people the wrong way when it seemed as if no one else on the train wanted to intervene or even stop him once the threat had been eliminated. That's, I think, the key. Once you continue to chokehold someone, once he loses, consciousness, was it necessary for you to continuously to hold him down? Now, you've seen in some of his attorneys' arguments so far that they're going to talk about them being in a confined space, that it was in a subway, that there were other people who he presumed would have had their lives placed in danger if he did not intervene in this way. So yeah, it is a very kind of bold statement. He came to court. He only spoke those two words, not guilty, and he's back on the street. That's our system. So he paid his bond, so he's able to kind of live his life until his trial proceedings. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the evidence shows precipitated what we then see on video.
Talk to us. What role does the amount of time play into this? Now that we're in this stage of the case, right? Is the prosecutors, will the prosecutors really like key in on the fact that this wasn't like a 2-minute, 3-minute interaction, that this was actually a 15-minute interaction where there were a host of things happening? You got people coming off this train, Jordan Neely screaming and, pleading for his life. The fact that he held him for that long. Talk to how does the time frame of the chokehold fit into this?
Yeah, we have to remember, Farajii, that Mr. Petty was a trained person who served in our military. So I think the prosecutors are going to hone in on the fact that he's a trained, some would call it killer, not my words. I've seen that used kind of in the media spaces, that he knows what this type of maneuver will yield and what type of outcome he can expect if he's held someone in that position for that amount of time. So I think prosecutors will try to argue, as you've described, that he kind of was excessive. It wasn't reasonable for you to still think this man was a threat, however many minutes into your positioning your arm, snuffing out the breath of this man by chokeholding him, right? Holding your arm around his neck and really asphyxiating him while he was laying there on the floor. So I think they're going to kind of lean into his military training and make the argument that he is not an average person. He is a trained, person with specialized knowledge, being that he served in the military, to know better and to know what this type of move may have, caused in terms of the outcome for the individual that you are chokeholding. So I think that's going to play, his military service might play a role in what the prosecution argues.
Pretty Brown Mimi 726. Pretty Brown Mimi, thank you as always for checking in. One of our great loyal culture crew members, she checked in and said, Suzette, since the murder was recorded, can that be used as evidence against Daniel Penny?
Absolutely. Now, there's always rules of evidence where the where the defense will try to remove certain pieces of evidence from going into trial. So this is why cases take so long. In the criminal court, everything comes down to, the judge's ruling as to what follows constitutional muster and what rightfully should be removed in terms of the evidence rules in criminal court. So if things are prejudicial, if things were not obtained properly with, the proper warrants, et cetera, the defense is going to try to block them from getting in. From what I see, this should be entered into the record. But of course, they're going to probably have individual hearings before the judge. So the judge makes a determination on each piece of evidence, but they're going to argue that before we get the trial. So that's why sometimes the trials take a little bit longer and are extended. But yeah, for right now, I don't see what reasonable argument the defense can make to prevent this video from being entered into evidence.
Absolutely. Pauline, you checked in. Pauline Hurt, my sister, thank you for checking in and being a part of the conversation. You said, of course, he is pleading not guilty. Yeah, we knew that was going to happen. Deidre Hall, my sister, thank you for checking in. You said, I knew he was going to do this. And Real Brooklyn, you got a controversial take on this. You said, dude stepped up and did what was supposed to be done. There's there are too many criminals walking around causing people harm and nothing is being done about it. Sorry, can't agree on sending Penny to jail.
I mean, he has raised, I forget how many million in his legal defense fund, Farajii. There are people that agree with that statement. Again, I think 2.9 million in donations to his GoFundMe to defend Daniel Penny. So there are people who feel very strongly that he is some sort of hero and have argued that if he didn't intervene, the outcome would have been much worse.
Right.
We're going to see once we hear witness testimony, other statements that were taken like closer to the time of the incident, from those who were in the train and what his autopsy said, et cetera, we're going to see both sides kind of be presented. But I hear what you're saying, sir. There are $2.9 million that express similar sentiment as what you've just shared.
Real Brooklyn continued to say that he living in New York City, he said he sees all kinds of crazy people who commit crimes and nothing happens except they get released. But what was really the crime that Jordan Neely committed, except for, I guess you're going to say, on the low end, disturbing the peace?
And having mental health issues and not being...
Is that a crime?
It's not a crime, excuse me. I'm saying that would be what initiated and precipitated what took place.
Right, but disturbing the peace, though, is a misdemeanor, though, right?
It's not. Yeah, it definitely, I think the average person looking at what we saw in the video would not suggest that anything about what we saw on the video justifying the type of reaction that would lead to death. Again, disturbing the peace should not be a death sentence, if in fact that's what precipitated before what we saw on video. But there is a long standing issue in New York with the challenges of how to approach mental health, being that there are a lot of people that struggle with mental health and that they are in and out of, and I agree with the brother's statement there, part of his statement there, where there is not necessarily a long-term solution for a lot of people. So they're on the street. They're doing what Mr. Neely did, which was trying to, make a living doing impersonating or trying to find, his way in this world, having lost his mother, having dealt with a lot of issues over the last several years. So some would argue maybe that our system in terms of the mental health piece is really to blame and that he is just kind of now an emblem of what is really the true issue that's going on, particularly in the state of New York with mental health and the mental health crisis.
Absolutely. So we're going to have to see how this thing plays out. He's got to go back to court, obviously. Yeah. But this is still, as I thought, like I said, when I first saw this video, and I'm sure maybe you didn't see it because maybe you didn't think this because you know all of the intricacies of the law. But it seemed like it was an open shut case. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, okay, yeah. He kind of overreacted to the point that this caused this man's death. But now, it just makes you even sad that you get to this point, and there is a very real possibility that this man will not be charged for murder.
Not be convicted. Yep.
Or not be convicted. Excuse me. Right. Mm-hmm. That he will not be convicted for murder. And that is absolutely insane to me. I cannot wrap my mind around that, Suzette. It's just, I don't know what this. I don't know how to even process that.
I hear you. We operate under the presumption of innocence in our courts. So it is up to the prosecution to do their job, and hopefully they will. And again, he'll get a fair hearing just like anybody else. But if the evidence shows, that he should have acted in a different manner, that he overstepped his bounds as a citizen and took another man's life unjustifiably, we'll see. But it's going to have to play out in the court of law.
Absolutely. Folks, we got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, let's shift gears here. Let's talk about the latest decision coming out of the Supreme Court, where they have decided to reject a controversial legal theory that played a huge part in the 2020 election and might be even more significant in the 2024 election. We'll talk about that. Stay with us. The Culture is coming right back at you here on the Black Star Network.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Check some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
I'm Farajii Muhammad, live from LA. And this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation. You and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together. So let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture, weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. The next conversation that we should be having, that we're going to have, is about a little theory that was sort of kind of like played in the background for the 2020 election, but now is right on the forefront of the Supreme Court, where they have rejected a controversial legal theory called the independent state legislature theory. And this is a theory, folks, that would give partisan state lawmakers nearly unchecked powers over U.S. elections. This is a part of the overall guidelines for how courts in the states handle U.S. elections. This was a theory that Trump and his supporters used to try to undermine the 2020 elections. So now the Supreme Court, and they have done a lot of controversial decision making, but it seems like they're finally getting to the core of what happened for the 2020 elections to try to prevent that from happening in the 2024 election with rejecting this legal theory. Take a look at this this breakdown. This is coming from CNN, because this theory came up in a case about North Carolina redistricting. Take a look at this, folks. In the case about North Carolina redistricting, the Supreme Court ruled that state courts and other state entities can review laws passed by state legislators setting rules for federal elections. The court's majority, which is a coalition of 3 conservative with the 3 justice liberal bloc, rejected the GOP-backed theory that elected politicians have unreviewable authority to set election rules. One of the reasons Republicans might want to shift power to state legislatures is because their party has a structural advantage on the forefront. Republicans currently control the legislature in 4 states that Joe Biden carried in 2020, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, and New Hampshire, and they control 2 additional state houses in the background states of North Carolina and Florida. All right, let me check back in with my sister Suzette Speaks, who is an attorney, to get her take on this, because Suzette, I personally never heard of the independent state legislature theory. This apparently is one of those small things that has a big, significant impact. So was the Supreme Court right on this decision? Did they have to reject it?
This was a win for democracy. If I could stand up and cheer for the Supreme Court of the United States, y'all, I would. They have restored some semblance.
There we go.
Thank you very much.
There we go.
From the bottom of my heart, I was like, oh my goodness. Even though this is a very conservative court with a lot of appointees by former President Trump, we saw, I think, the right decision. And if people haven't heard of this, this has been kind of around, Farajii, since the 2000 election. If you remember back, Bush v. Gore, this has been a struggle for power. And I believe it's a reflection of the changing demographic of our country. And those are our brothers and sisters in the Republican Party. Yes, I will call them brothers and sisters, although this is like a top right-wing brass of them, have tried to develop what some are calling like a legal theory, but I think that gives it too much credence. It's this idea that the state legislatures of each of the states would have the ultimate authority to govern state election law. Now, why would they think that? There is a clause in the United States Constitution that does in Article 1 talk about the state legislatures have the right to determine how elections are conducted and how to elect senators and House of Representative members. So the Republicans on the conservative side of this issue, who developed this theory since 2000, have been saying, well, it's clear as day in the Constitution. And that's what we saw with the 3 justices in their dissent argue that as what they call strict constructionists, people who believe the Constitution as written should be taken at its bold-faced word, believe that because it says so, this is what we should be doing. On the other hand, what the majority argued and what the majority opinion states is that, unfortunately, or fortunately for those of us who believe in democracy, this theory, this idea that state legislatures would be the end-all, be-all based on that clause is not holding, because we've always had this idea of judicial review. Since a case back in the 1800s called Marbury versus Madison, for those of us who have been through law school, that was one of the first cases we learned about, that the legislature's actions are given to us by the Constitution. They are not an independent body that all of a sudden has more power than the Constitution itself. So even though those actions are granted there, we have always maintained since its very inception the idea that there are courts that can interpret the behavior of legislatures and lawmaking as their duty in terms of whether they pass constitutional muster, whether they are under state law or under constitutional U.S. constitutional law, meeting the standard that they should. So our Supreme Court justices in a 6-3 decision have decided that there is no superseding power in state legislatures to create voting laws, right? They are subject to state Supreme Courts and judicial review.
So that changes the game. for anybody who may be running in this in the 2024 election on this idea of the big lie. This changes the game. Will it do would it make a significant impact on those who still try to run under the Trump banner, or is this something that some candidates may be able to navigate and avoid depending on the states that they represent?
This will have significant impact, Farajii. So we've seen, based on the last election when Trump espoused, that he had actually won when he did, and he tried to create, state electors, fake electors to go to the U.S. Congress with votes of who they claimed that they would represent in terms of the ones that he created. Yeah. Basically, this is the wonderful outcome from this ruling, is that it kind of sets the bar from 2024. There have been a lot of gray areas, and we saw Trump and his team file lawsuits across the country, more than 60 lawsuits, trying to argue that what the state legislatures ruled in terms of their lawmaking authority was what should have stood, and that there were courts that were rejecting this, limiting this, reversing their actions, and that they were going too far. Now we know, and thankfully the Supreme Court has made it very clear in this opinion, that there is no what they would call plenary power of state legislatures. So basically all the laws we've been seeing across the country when it comes to access to the ballot, times when you can vote, how you register, this specific case had to do with that partisan gerrymandering that we've been talking about over and over again here, that they had cut up maps for congressional districts to favor one party and not necessarily reflect the true demographic of the voters and therefore the will of the people. So the Supreme Court in North Carolina said, no, this is illegal. You cannot draw maps to favor one side in this partisan way, which again, we have had this discussion about Florida and many other places where the legislature, because they do not have the numbers when it comes to the demographics of the voters, they're using lawmaking power to supersede that and create districts so that their team wins. So now courts across the country have the authority based on this outcome to say, no, we have a judicial review and responsibility to go back and look at what you've done. The Supreme Court has also just ruled on the Alabama case that said you cannot just draw all the Black people in one district and a third of the people that live in Alabama are Black. So we get one congressional district. No, Republican-run legislatures, you do not have free reign to create this kind of one-sided one-voiced democracy. And I'm so glad we'll have that clarity that they intervene with this case to let everybody know what the rules of engagement will be going forward.
All right, we got about 30 seconds before we take our next pause, Suzette. But I'm wondering, can anyone try to fight this? Can any states try to push back on this? Can anybody file a lawsuit against this?
They can, but now we have hopefully precedent because the Supreme Court, depends on its makeup, has flip-flop we've seen in recent times. But as a whole, a lot of those lawsuits that we saw after 2020 wouldn't stand, because now we have clarity that there is, in fact, judicial review from state Supreme Courts that should and can limit the power of the state legislatures. They do not have all-encompassing power when it comes to voting issues and election law creation. You have the check and balances. So yeah, you might see lawsuits, but now we have a clear opinion from the Supreme Court that is no longer the lay of the land, and that judges and Supreme Courts from across this country now can very confidently oversee the craziness that has been taking place oftentimes in state legislatures across this country.
Absolutely. Folks, we got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, I would love to get your take, crew, on this controversial theory, and more importantly, this big decision coming out of the Supreme Court. What's your take? Post your comments on our YouTube page under Roland Martin, as we're streaming right there. And also continue to stay tuned to BlackStarNetwork.com and Amazon News as well. We'll be right back. And when we come back, more conversation, your thoughts on this as well. So stay with us. It's The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
hatred on the streets. A horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol,
we're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear. Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. We've been talking about how the Supreme Court of the United States has rejected a controversial legal theory. The theory is called the independent state legislature. It was rejected by the High Court just yesterday. This is the piece of legislation that has fueled President Trump and his allies to that they use to try to undermine the 2020 election. And so with this latest decision coming from the Supreme Court, it takes away a lot of power, takes the wind out of the wings of those who support President Trump or who think like him or who think that they can run on the big lie. It takes a lot of wind from their sails as we go into the 2024 election. However, it's still it is something that could possibly be challenged, but most likely it won't be. But this, folks, is another example of voter suppression. Let me go back to my sister, Suzette Speaks, as we talk about this. And I think this is the best way to look at it, voter suppression. Here's the part about this, Suzette. So many of us, and I'm talking about us as constituents, us as citizens of this country, as however you want to categorize us. But so many of us, as much as we are politically astute or politically aware, it's stuff like this that, you know, it kind of hits you in the gut, and at the same time makes you realize that you don't know all of the loopholes of the law. You don't know all the loopholes of how to get into power. And many of us, we've been conditioned to believe it's only about the vote, not knowing that behind the scenes that the powers that be and those who want to be even greater power, it's not even about the vote. They're using the documents that have already been and the laws that have already been put on the books as a way, and they weaponize it to try to back their agenda. And this is a level of political warfare that we as the constituents and citizens, we aren't skilled in waging, because we just don't know about these little things. You know, when we had these conversations, people were like, oh, no, just vote. You know, if black people vote, we will get further along. And it's like, I mean, we can vote, but there are loopholes. There are ways that we can get around the vote, and people still can get into power. And people are asking the question, well, how did that happen? Because of stuff like this.
Well, I understand what you're saying, and I would kind of offer that the reason they're doing all of this is to diminish the vote. Because if the vote was allowed to take place, we would be moving in a different direction in our country.
But
so
see, that's what I'm saying,
they can't win. They can win in suits. This is like a Gestapo. This is like, I hear what you're saying. This is the setup where you are going through, what should I say, very, very skillful avenues of trying to change the rules of the game so that you win and you continue to win, and that your opponent has no chance of being elected, fairly. So I would argue that the root cause of what they're doing is so that they can diminish the vote. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm not saying that we don't need other foot soldiers. That's why we need people to go to law school. We need people on the front lines in every which way to help combat this type of, I would say, sinister. I guess what you're saying is like, why is it allowed? Again, we have to pay attention. And I think running for office is another component of what you're describing. But the whole reason why they're doing this is because if they allowed people to, vote freely and fairly, they wouldn't win. So I hear what you're saying, but I think that's kind of where this all kind of stems from, which is controlling the outcomes. Yeah.
And I totally agree with the point you just made about that this still leads to diminishing the power of the vote. But this is a big step in. I mean, if the Supreme Court did not make this decision, we could have potentially been in the same place that we saw in 2020 come 2024. You feel what I'm saying? Absolutely. But it's just the fact that we don't know. Like the average American, quote unquote, however y'all describe, whoever's in that category, the average American doesn't study law and politics. Mm-mm. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So we have only certain individuals like yourself and others. There are groups of lawyers, there are a group of politicians, but that number is so small compared to, of course, the number of people in this country. So we don't know. Right. And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, we can go and do what we can do as constituents, but I still feel like the wool has been pulled over my eyes, Suzette, just a tad bit, because people are like, we've been always conditioned to believe that this is a quote unquote a fair system. Real Brooklyn, I think you brought it up, bro. You said that this is what happens to, let me make sure I say this correctly, because you said as long as we still have an electoral college system, what progression are we really seeing here? You see what I'm saying? Like, there are still elements of our voting system and our governmental system that makes us believe that we got power, but then you see little loopholes like this little legal theory, and Trump is able to like completely just blow up the whole system in the sense of removing, diminishing the faith that people have in the system. People are questioning the system, right? And so it's not just about the vote. It's about the fact that we don't know. We've been conditioned to believe it's just one thing, but we really don't know all of the ins and outs of the system well enough to really wage a real war against those who want to be in power. I hope I'm making sense on this.
No, you do. I'm just of the leaning that one, for me, cannot stand outside of a system and change it. That's me. So I understand very well that our population as a whole, Black people and beyond, are not really taught civics and the understanding of what we are supposedly, in control of versus not in control of, and how we can affect change. And again, this audience here on the Roland Martin Black Star Network is I think, skewed towards people who care, people who pay attention, people who read independently of the mainstream media, people who understand there's more than meets the eye. I get what you're saying totally.
Yeah,
but I do think I don't see how one affects change by saying, all right, I don't think this is a fair system. Let me withdraw myself from that system because it's crooked. There are reasons why the richest people in our country, when they make money, what they do, they invest in a politician. They put their money into the political game, or they run themselves, because this is the U.S. System. It all goes back to politics. So if we're on the outside of that, mad at it, it's just, we still lose, is what I'm saying, because rules are still going to change. People still going to get their way. So we're fighting against that. I understand what you're saying, that kind of Goliath of a system that is not built for the little person, that people with, again, the money alone in politics skews it all the time to people who can influence the, congressional leaders, et cetera, et cetera. So I hear what you're saying. It's not completely a level playing field, but I still don't understand how we would make progress without participating in it in some way, shape, or form.
I don't mind us participating, but we do need to become knowledgeable.
100%.
Right?
Yes.
We do need to become knowledgeable. Let me go to some of the crew members. Corinna, my sister, you checked in. You know Corinna, right?
Hey, Corinna, Denise.
Corinna said a couple of things. She said, it's about studying the system, understanding it so we can change it, vote, peace, crew. But then she also said this. She said, I push back on we have been conditioned. It's also our responsibility to learn and raise questions instead of just running away with the conditioning. I agree. And to Suzette's point, for those of you, if you tune into any show on this platform, you already, you know what I'm saying? Like,
you're way more advanced than the average voter. Yes.
Right. But for those of us who have checked out, who have decided that they're going to just go along to get along. For those of us who don't question, right? And look, can you really get mad at anybody who has been conditioned to not think outside of the box when that has been drilled into our head about politics, right? And then if we do have out of the box conversations about politics and political power, the arsenal on how to achieve that power is so limited. It's not like, hey, I think one of our crew members said we need more black lawyers. Okay, but that's not drilled. That's not the drilling part. The drilling part is y'all need to go out and vote, or y'all need to put up a black candidate, or y'all need. It's like still like the surface level stuff, whereas you're dealing with a political enemy, political opposition that's working beneath that. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, y'all can vote, just to the point where you made people, when you get rich and famous, guess what the rich and famous do? They actually invest in both parties.
Yeah, absolutely.
So why do they invest in both parties? They don't even care about voting. They invest in both parties because they're like, look, if so-and-so wins, I'm going to get my agenda across. If this person wins, I'm going to get my agenda across. And for the American people, we have been almost like, oh, well, we need to choose one of two sides. But the people that have the money, that want the power, they understand the game a lot better, I think, than we do.
Fair point. Fair point.
I'm just saying. All right, let me go take one more. Let me take one more piece on something else from our culture crew on this situation. And folks, this is interesting. Let me see here. Who we got here? Let me see. Corinna says, oh, my man Willie, you said question for Suzette very quickly. Does this really mitigate the damage that was done in 2020? Gerrymandering have Republicans the House. In North Carolina, the new Supreme Court allowed the map after the old court said no. And to Willie's point, thank you, Willie. Does this really mitigate the damage?
Heck yeah, it does. If they have ruled the other way, we would be like, again, I think it does restore some semblance of fairness to our system, where we can't have runaway legislatures do whatever they want. Now we know by law of the United States Supreme Court that they are subject to judicial review to their own state Supreme Courts and also to the U.S. Supreme Court. So I do believe this is a huge save, if you will. And to Faraji's point, there are a lot of things that don't go right in the system, but thankfully we have some fairness because we have a few of the conservatives taking, the sides with the liberals, if you will, on the U.S. Supreme Court and voting according to preserving the system of judicial review that we've always had in this country, that you can't just do whatever you want, state legislature. You are one of the co-equal branches, and you can be also kind of subject to another branch saying that what you're doing is wrong and steps out of bounds in terms of the Constitution. So I do believe, Willie Frazier, this is going to help, not hurt, voting rights efforts going forward, and kind of help mitigate some of the foolishness that's been going on in state legislatures around the country.
I hope so. And because 2024, there we go.
With the Nancy clap. I was like, Lord, You still working. We still have hope.
Hey, Suzette, we got a lot of ground to cover.
Still a lot more. That's why
have a lot of ground to
building. All of what you said, beyond voting, there are a lot of things that we do need to focus on as well. And education is one of them. There's so many we can talk about, but I know we're going to take a break. So.
We got to take a break. My sister Suzette Speaks, always hitting the nail on the head.
Let's do
getting me to think another different way. All right, whatever, Suzette, whatever.
Love it.
Look, we got to take a quick pause when we come forward. Let's talk a little bit as we shift talking from politics. Let's talk about the culture, the evolution of hip hop. It is 50 years later. We're going to be checking in with legendary DJ Navs to talk to us about what he's planning to do to show his love and appreciation for the culture. And more importantly, what should we expect for the next 50 years? So stay with us for that conversation here on The Culture on the Black Star Network.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
I'm Farajii, live from LA, and this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation, you and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together, so let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture, weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Check some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. Welcome to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. I'm your host, Farajii Muhammad, and getting ready to jump into our second hour right now. And folks, if you missed the first hour, make sure you are part of Team Replay, as my sister Suzette Speaks often talks about, where you can check out the first two conversations, dynamic discussions about what's going on within the culture. Make sure y'all check us out on blackstarnetwork.com and, of course, on Amazon News. And we're streaming right now live on YouTube, where you could join us on the conversation. Just look under Roland Martin on YouTube and then click the link for The Culture, and you can jump right in and be a part of the Culture crew. All right, folks, now it's time for us to show our love and reverence for the culture that really is the foundation of this whole discussion, this whole show, which is hip-hop culture. And of course, folks, this year marks 50 years of hip-hop. And I wanted to continue to have the conversation about the evolution of hip hop 50 years later. We are now joined by legendary DJ Nabs is joining us. DJ Nabs, welcome to the culture here on the Black Star Network. How are you, brother?
Hey, brother, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. First and foremost, and I'm going to bring my sister Suzette Speaks back into this in a moment, but I want to let people know who exactly you are. If they're not familiar, you've been in the game for some time. Over 3 decades, you built a legacy in the industry down in Atlanta. You've worked with a number of folks, including the king of pop himself, Michael Jackson, Mariah Carey, Grandmaster Flash, Curtis Blow. You were on Atlanta local station WVEE down there, former president of Columbia Records Black Music Division. They hired you as the DJ and music director for the rap duo Criss Cross that came out of Atlanta. And I mean, you've just been all around, but one of the big notables is that you hosted a show back in 1996 called In the Lab with DJ Nabs with your then co-host / intern, Ludacris.
Yeah, it's been a long career.
You've been around, brother. First and foremost, thank you for their work in the industry, your work for the culture, brother. We truly, truly appreciate it. Talk to us a little bit about what this 50 years of hip hop and celebrating hip hop means to you, Nabs.
It's interesting because in some ways it's not exactly what I expected. I don't know what I expected. It came so fast. Yeah, but you know, to kind of step back just a little bit, you know, I'm from Durham, North Carolina. And in the 80s, everybody pretty much that I knew that was trying to get into hip hop was focused on New York City. And I was a little intimidated by New York. So I ended up moving down to Atlanta in 1988. And Atlanta had a Miami base and a Atlanta base kind of scene. And as the years progressed, as you just mentioned, Criss Cross, once Criss Cross broke in 92, I also remixed the single for Arrested Development, Tennessee, the same year, which is how I got connected with the whole Criss Cross management team. And from there, I spent 30 years in Atlanta and recently came back to North Carolina just before the pandemic. So a 30-year career, 25 years of those were with So Def, and about 20 years in the radio, which is how I was able to help people like Ludacris, even T.I., Ciara, many other artists who were in school at the time when I was on the radio. So that's kind of how my beginnings and my career happened. And I think now we're celebrating 50 years of hip hop. I came home and realized that a lot of people don't know the history of hip hop in North Carolina in the 80s when we were kids. So we had it back when it was rap week of events and a podcast to help bring that information forward so that we could post on our site, nchip-hophistory.com.
So and the fact that, you know, if you follow hip hop, the shining star that has come out of North Carolina is J. Cole.
Right. And see, before that it was Petey Pablo. But that's only only 2003.
Right.
Only
So that's still a fairly new situation, right?
I'm sorry?
I said, you know, you said Petey Pablo in 2003. I mean, that's still like a fairly new growth that's coming out of and sound that came out of North Carolina.
Sure. And I think, you know, it's again, because it's 50 years of hip hop and so many people have stories, it's just going to take time to unpack, right? But because this is where I'm from, the 80s, there was Strike Force Disco. There was Waxmaster Tory, who became Trey Black, who would be most known for the Dangerous Mind soundtrack with Michelle Pfeiffer. Trey Black had a song on that. He was from Durham. Generette, Shirley Caesar's nephew, he was part of the first disco crew, or disco, and I'm saying disco because disco and rap that's what it was. It was disco.
Right. Yep.
So that's why everybody was disco. So it was Strike Force Disco, Wizard of Sounds, all from this area. This is where I heard hip hop. These are the people who played the records, Mr. Freeze records. So it was important for me, even though I've had a whole career in Atlanta. And we hear a lot of Atlanta stories, which are now starting to come out. You'll hear more about my story because Atlanta is just scraping the surface. But North Carolina has a deeper history than 2003 when it comes to hip hop.
So let me ask you, like, and I want to bring my sister Suzette Speaks into this discussion as well, because I know she's a hip hop head as well, as much as I am. But when we look at how this thing has evolved, like you just said, you didn't really have no expectations. Should we start to have some expectations? I mean, we've gotten kind of like fumbling and bumbling. We've been jamming and moving for the past 50 years, but for the next 50 years, to ensure that our story, our culture is truly solidified in not just American history, but in global history, should we have a little bit more intentionality behind the direction of the culture?
I would say so, because my musical mentor in this business is Michael Malden, who you mentioned he was the head of black music at Columbia Records. He Jermaine Dupri's father. He's ran Columbia Records, signed Alicia Keys, Maxwell, Destiny's Child. I had my record done in 98 on Columbia Records, which is where I featured Ludacris. He has an organization called Black American Music. And all his discussion is always, every time we're on the phone, we're discussing about the music that we create. See, hip hop, and I'm a DJ. So when I started, even though I was a hip hop or a DJ that played rap music in the 80s, we were still playing R&B. We were still playing break beats, break records from jazz, from all of the things that black people create. So for hip hop is just another thing that we've created. In a lot of ways, it's really the past as far as the culture of making rap music, rapping, scratching, right? All the elements that really made hip hop as we know it, a lot of it is in the past. The term hip hop is still used on radio, to describe all these different things. So it's a little muddy. But the overall thing is that we are creative people. It may be something else beyond calling it hip hop. But as long as we continue to create and we have some ownership and are part of the evolution of what we create, I'm good. But I think to your point, that is what we need to be about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Suzette?
Hey, first of all, it's an honor to be here. DJ Nav is a part of hip hop history, and thank you for sharing your knowledge of the story, because I think it's so important. The one thing I love, Farajii, is that branding it hip hop at 50 at least allows us some ability to tell our own story. Shout out to Roland Martin, so that it is not hijacked. And I was going to ask DJ Nabs that question: has hip hop music or culture kind of been bastardized, I would say, over the last maybe 10 years, or hijacked even for commercial purposes? Because I think people are first and foremost in awe of Black creativity. I think sometimes that gets lost because we are just naturally in our element, producing such magic. When we think about the impact it has had from France to South Africa to the Maori culture off the coast of Australia, we have created this genre that people throughout history now over the last 50 years have related to, have identified with, have connected with. But as DJ Nabs points out, we don't always have the monetization of it. And people are utilizing it for, promotion of their brands and, their products. And for what I believe they want Black people to believe about themselves and what they want us to buy, etc. So do we still have, I guess in a pure form, hip hop in what we're hearing on the radio today? Or as you described, is it a thing of the past?
Woo, that's a lot to chew on.
Right. That's how Suzette bring it, Nabs.
I know. First of all, there's so many different small pockets of areas that I can speak on. I'll just kind of focus a little bit on the DJing and the education part of the technological side of DJing and the education part that I see. What I see now is, let me take it back to the way we heard DJs interact with the MC. For the most part, came from records, unless you were part of that early hip hop scene in New York and you really were there with the Funky 4 Plus One More and the Cold Crush and those guys, late 70s. But we experienced it through listening to DJs scratch and mix and produce and sample. That's how we heard it. So I would relate it to the jazz era sense of the creativity. Now, when I look up today, hip hop is being, or DJing, let me stay on that, DJing, mixing and scratching is being taught and sold to the world by everybody except the pioneers. The pioneers are still here. The DJs, the Flashes, the Mixmaster Ice, rest in peace to Jam Master Jay, and many others who created mixing and scratching styles on record. And now I think there's not much acknowledgement and there's not much opportunity for the pioneers to benefit from what they've created. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. That's and you know what it comes down to, Nabs? Nobody's getting paid. Like the pioneers aren't getting paid. They're not getting their just due. They're not getting the credit, right? And then you have generations that are listening to the music, and essentially they're thinking, oh, this sound comes from this artist, when in fact that wasn't the case. So you know what I'm saying? Like you said, like we talked about North Carolina, for example. People are like, oh yeah, J. Cole put North Carolina on the map. And you'd be like,
North Carolina, come on, stand up.
You know what I'm saying? Right. You know, same thing with the Atlanta scene. You know, I loved hip hop, man. I fell in love with the Atlanta scene, music scene, when Outkast dropped their first album. And then once Outkast came out, bro, Nabs, I was done. I was like All Atlanta, Cool Breeze, and the Dungeon Family, Goody Mob, the whole nine. It was like, whoa, boy, this
got something to say.
Better than the East Coast.
No, that was a big movement.
Huge.
That was huge.
I don't think people give Outkast enough credit, but Outkast just like cracked it open in a big, big way. But it's a lot for us to think about. Folks, look, we got to take a quick pause. When we come forward, Nabs, I want to get your take. I want to get Suzette's take on some of the recent criticism about hip hop. Bow Wow said some things at the BET Awards around the issue. And we're also going to talk about how LL Cool J and Ice-T is planning to do their part to preserve some of the memorabilia of hip hop culture. So folks, we still got a lot to talk to with legendary producer DJ Nab here on The Culture. So stay with us. It's The Culture here on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, this difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig? When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Your money makes this possible. Check some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
All right, folks, welcome back to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. We have been talking about the evolution of hip-hop 50 years later. As we know, this year marks 50 years of one of the most powerful cultures in the world, hip-hop music and culture. And I've been having this conversation with two dynamic people. Our very special guest, legendary producer and DJ Nabs is joining us this afternoon. And, of course, we're also joined by my sister, Suzette Speaks, as she representing Florida.
Let's go.
Where they do that thing in a very special and different way and adding to the culture in a very, very big way. But Nabs, I want to get your take on this because, and Keenan, I don't know if we can play, let me know if we can play this little video, but there are people that are criticizing hip hop, saying that right now, Nabs, that the culture and everything is just sounding the same. And I wanted to get your take on this. Let me know, Keenan, when we can get this, if we can get I want to get Bow Wow into this because he said something on the red carpet at this year's BET Awards, where he said that essentially everything is sounding the same. Keena, let me know if we can play this. But what's your take on that, Naps? I mean, you're a producer, you're a DJ, you hear it, you know that there's the ebb and flow of this sound. What's your take on that?
It sounds the same. Does it sound the same, y'all? Does it not sound the same? You know, let me just say this. You know, when it comes to music, I know that everybody has an opinion, but it's like nobody wants to say the unpopular thing, and our music is not positive as it was. We know this to be a fact. We know for a fact that as a people, when they say hip hop saved us, did it save us? What's really different? See, my mom, I remember not explaining hip hop to my mom, but more or less letting my mom know I wanted to be a DJ, and of course she had to let me. Otherwise, I would have never been one. That was 1984. You know, I'm 13. It's 84, and so we watch hip hop become all these great things. And my mom, it's still the same thing. It's still prayer. It's still the same. It's the same basic thing. So I think hip hop's got a place in this world, but it's not here to save us. And I think also that it is just like anything else that's brought into this world. It will and can and has been exploited by those who don't care about it. So
let me ask you this. Here's my take on it. I want to get your take though.
Huh?
Isn't the purpose of our music? Wasn't the purpose or the intent of our music? And Suzette, I'll let you get your take on this. Is to go mainstream, to be able for the most amount of people to hear our sound, our story, to feel our rhythm. Isn't that the purpose?
You asking me?
I'm asking you first.
Yeah, for sure. But it's the same old issue. We don't control the mainstream, and it's mostly expression. Well, let me just not, because it's different for different people. If people go into the music business and if they want to make money, and then you'll make money and you'll chase money based on popularity. That is everybody's choice. But really, music is expression, and I found that what made hip hop work, because I was there, was the fight and the struggle that we had. So if you could get good on the turntables, if you could produce a good beat, if you could rap, it was another avenue to make it an entertainment. Before, when I was in school, again, as a kid, before hip hop was established, that was not an option. I played saxophone. I was a music major. I joined the military playing sax because at the time, it wasn't a sure shot. I would even find a way to be Run DMC. I mean, Jam Master Jay with Run DMC. But I did. That opportunity came with Crisscross. I became Crisscross's DJ, recorded songs with Crisscross, toured with Crisscross, the whole nine. So we got in there, and then the business. Over time. Now I think we're being fed a lot of material that's not good for our community. I think the music is not necessarily good. It does sound the same because, again, as you said, it's being marketed, it's working, so they keep pushing it on us. But we're not, and I wish I was an executive that could tell you, oh man, tell you the behind the scenes about how many Black executives are in play and how many are not right now. But that's got a lot to do with it because we don't have any moral say on the music that's being delivered to our communities.
Suzette, no go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Naps.
Oh, no, I was just saying no moral say. That's all. I'm sorry.
No, it's good, bro. It's good. Suzette, what's your take on that?
Well, I couldn't agree more with DJ Nabs because I think the popularity came about in its early forms in terms of why this music took, I'm talking about a stranglehold of American suburban culture, is that it spoke truth and that what we talked about was so real and so raw and was the impetus for a different version of the American story to be told out loud with unadulterated truth. Now, when I hear music, and I know we'll go to the clip from Bow Wow, I'm not sure what truth is being told. I believe the earlier hip hop, and now this could be a old head versus young head, conversation, but it was timeless and it was universal. The themes that were talked about, the stories that were shared, if you put it on the radio right now, it's still a bop. But what we're hearing now is, I think, I don't want to call it mind control, because, I like a little, thug love, every now and then with my music when I work out. When when you're even entering court, I need to have a little, hey, let's go. You might be my tomorrow. I'll put it on, right? But I think for many of us who are kind of standing from, the rear view looking forward, we're kind of frightened by, the clip of Bobby Jones sitting in the BET Awards with, I forget the lady's name, who came out with a song talking about her body parts and the colors. And we're like, what are we doing? This is very debased. This is something that is, almost exploitive, as was mentioned by DJ Nabs. Like, what are we telling Black girls and Black women to be? And who is leading in those voices? Now, again, I do believe everybody should have a space for expression, but what gets put on the radio 10 times every hour is a choice. So I feel like there is something missing in what's going on in today's music. And again, I listen to my trap a fair share. I listen, you know what I'm saying? But there's no balance is what I'm afraid of. What say you, DJ Nabs, about why the messaging, the truth that once, held this country captive, a Tupac, a Biggie, and everybody else in between, why is it that the messaging seems so, maybe shallow or empty and less powerful actually in a way, but not towards the building up of the individual or the community?
So I feel like I want to kind of break down what I think happens when a record is recorded. From that, a record is recorded and put on the internet and or picked up by a major label. What happens to me is, first of all, if you see what's working musically, and let's just start with the Migos, because I was in Atlanta, obviously, when Migos popped, and Atlanta has always had a great way of supporting their own artists. The Migos spoke to their audience, and once they got put into the mainstream, which is the companies do that, they put them in the mainstream, people follow suit with the style. So from that style, developed all the way to, let's just say, we calling it trap. Now, trap is probably the most recognizable thing that people associate with hip hop. What I see is, as a DJ who still receives music from all sort of places, all sort of artists, I realize that the labels all mimic the sound that's hot, as we know. So that means they ignore every other style of music, every style of expression, and focus on one. Now, my question, along with yours, is why is it per se destructive, or not necessarily positive, or no balance? Well, the record companies do all the businesses with all the radio stations, the hip hop radio stations across the country. Now, mind you, Atlanta didn't get a hip hop radio station until '95. Okay, so once you got the radio stations in place, you have the labels in place. They're doing business. Now they're doing the festivals and the shows. So they will put Sexy Red, who you mentioned, who's the young artist you mentioned on BET, where they showed it with Bobby Jones. They take those artists and they give them the budget and the promotion. And then the hip hop blog sites, for the most part, the copy and paste websites, they didn't copy and paste all the promotions. So the balance is way lost, because there's no competing with the artists that the major labels support, that the radio stations support, because they're doing business with the record companies, and then the festivals, and they're doing business. So it's hard for us to hear anything outside in our community outside of what these companies are pushing upon us. And I'm receiving the records, and I know there's tons more records than what the radio stations are playing. And the people at the stations are keeping their jobs. And that's all this is.
It becomes like this business model and not a cultural phenomenon.
That's all it is. And listen, I've been in hip hop so long, even when you talk about, let's go to Atlanta, we talk about Crisscross with Jump. Tag team with Whoop, there it is. TLC with their project when they came. This is all before Outkast. So Crisscross, Arrested Development, Tennessee, Whoop, there it is. Let's say TLC. A few years still all before Crisscross And these records, there was no rap station in Atlanta. We still didn't have a rap station till 3 years later. This is when Outkast came and the Dungeon Family. There was a station in Atlanta to play those guys. That's why Rico Wade and those guys saw success, because we had a radio station in Atlanta that we could play the local artists. That's all it was, because that's what Outkast still was, even though they were on LaFace, which was an R&B label. So LaFace was not in hip hop at all, but they still launched Outkast, and we had a station to support it. So without a signal, radio station or otherwise, to support and create and help with the balance, we are being force-fed what the labels determine we should be playing to the kids on the radio.
Right. Look, I got to take another quick pause. When we come forward, Nabs, if you could stay on just for a couple of minutes more, because I would love to kind of, continue to pick your brain as we're talking about the evolution of the culture. Folks, it is DJ Nabs joining us, special guest. We got my sister Suzette Speaks. And, of course, I want to hear from you. Join us in the conversation as we're streaming live on YouTube. Just go into Roland Martin. Post your thoughts and to be a part of the discussion as we talk about the evolution of hip-hop 50 years later, right here on The Culture, on the Black Star Network. We'll be right back.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punch!
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?
All right, folks, welcome back to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. We've been talking about the evolution of the culture, hip-hop culture 50 years later, joined by a very special guest, DJ Nabs, out of North Carolina, who has been a part of the game for over 30 years, has been doing great work in the music industry for So Def Records, being the DJ for Criss Cross, working with major artists both in Atlanta and across the country, and talking about where we are with this culture. Also joined by my sister Suzette Speaks, who is a hip-hop head, an attorney, and she probably was like a backup dancer or something.
Don't tell it off, right? But I did start a couple of dance groups in college, though. Hey, it was a thing. It was so cool.
Everybody was dancing. Nabs probably went around the country and just met a whole bunch of oh, you dance too? Oh, okay.
My first concert in life was Outkast, and I remember it clearly while in college. It was amazing, like life-changing. It was so amazing.
Wow.
It was. Me and Andre 3000 was here. I mean,
see, y'all went in the South. Hey, Nabs, I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Baltimore. So the big sound when I was coming into my understanding consciousness of hip hop in Baltimore, back in the 80s and the 90s, it was like Biggie and Jay. But even before then, we were rocking Criss Cross. We were definitely rocking Criss Cross hard.
We was De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, and many more.
It was like that New York influence, right?
Sure.
And people didn't think that the South, as my man Outkast from Andre, he said, y'all don't think that the South got something to say.
Exactly. And it blew up. It was amazing. It was huge. It was always East Coast, West Coast, and then all of a sudden the Dirty just came on the scene.
Then everybody was on it. But here's the thing, though. And I want to make sure I get a couple of because our culture crew has been checking in now. People have been talking about this. Willie Frazier, you said, so did Nabs produce that first Dirty South mixtape? Did you do that, Nabs?
What's the dirty? I did a Dirty South mixtape, but which mixtape are they speaking of?
All right, Willie, talk to us. Which mixtape? Because there's so many of them that came out of there. And I appreciate you, Willie. Tiana, you said, I like Kendrick Lamar, but everything else can kick rocks. So here's the thing I think about the conversation that we have about real hip-hop versus everybody's like, I don't know what this crap is. I feel like, Nabs, that it sets up more division within the culture versus the fact that, like, you came from a space where you came from the South, but you have an appreciation for all of Black music, right? Even though you may not, quote unquote, agree with it, but there's a place for it. That's my understanding of how this culture is moving, bro. Like I may not necessarily agree with trap music. I love Migos and I listen to the trap music, right? I may not always agree with it, but the culture is big. It's all of us, right? So that is some person's reality of trap music, right? That we need to embrace that part. So, I mean, am I off beat here when I say that you know what, we should just embrace all of hip hop instead of getting into this kind of like factions and sets and everybody's like, no, this is real, this is fake, this is bullshit, and this is
right.
I mean, are we doing ourselves a disservice to the culture?
Right. I think I'm not putting in it like myself. I'm a DJ. Like I'm sitting here with vinyl. I got
the real. No computers around here. Let's go. Let's go.
Music is all around me. So that's why I put hip hop in its place. When I started spending, at least if you spun in the 80s, even in the 90s, you were still spending plenty of R&B. Half of Kid Capri's legendary DJ sets were break beats of all styles of music. So hip hop became what it was because it sampled everything. So by default, hip hop is everything. When you start to say, let's go specifically to trap music. Trap music is a drum machine programmed genre. And there's samples in it, but it's mostly rolling 808, which is still 80s. Drum machine sounds. As a DJ, that's all it is. We just put it there. The lyrics are the thing. The lyrics and what's being marketed to our people is the issue. It's not really the music.
Right.
Future, as Rico Wade says, is third generation Dungeon family. Kendrick Lamar, his association with Dr. Dre all the way to now, everything makes sense. It makes sense musically. I love Future's music. What he's talking about, drugs, this, that, whatever those things may be, even as he grows and gets older. See, listen, as a 54-year-old man, which is what I am, Sukiyani and Sexy Red, I understand and Glorilla, I understand that you're using 3-6 Mafia beat. I understand you using this sound and that sound. It's a record, but it does not mean I'm going to relate nor want to hear 1,000 times on the radio about eating behind or this and that. So, and you're not going to make me. You're not going to make me like it because I have all of this other music everywhere of all sorts. Vinyl music because I'm a DJ, it's my life. So I can take the best of it and wish for the best. It doesn't make it, I don't think, decisive to dislike something. The only reason we making it a debate because it's popular music that's being promoted and money's behind it. If the money wasn't behind it and the promotion wasn't in our face, we wouldn't be discussing the Sexy Red record. We really wouldn't.
Right.
We say, oh, did you hear that record that somebody played? But no, because it's in our face every day, then we discuss it, and really records, a lot of records come and go anyway.
Right.
It's like marketing. Yes,
they come and go but the impression upon our children and upon our community, and I think like how we're looked at, because all of the elements of hip hop they don't need us for it anymore. They know how to rap, they know how to DJ, they know how to break dance, they know how to do everything. They don't need it from us anymore, and they're not waiting on us to hear a Glorilla record or trap record for the rest of the world to know what to do. They already know how to rap in their language. It's only us. It's a reflection of us, and that's the issue because the balance is not right.
Absolutely. I want to go back to that point you made about the executives in our original part of the conversation when I said being intentional with this movement. do we need to start to say we need more Black executives in the music industry so that way that our people can get better messages? Is that a way to deal with how, the way to kind of reconcile some people's uneasiness with the culture? Do we need to have Black faces in the room at the table?
I think just like everything else, if we don't have it, we won't have representation. And the conversation is not really talked about. A lot of executives, period, in the music business went to the streaming services. So they're at YouTube, they're at Spotify. They're not just at what we know as Def Jam Records and Death Row and all of these things, right? They're in the streaming world 1000% and probably beyond. And who are the Black executives? Do we know? Do we know how many we used to have? Do we know how many we have now? Right? All we know are the artists. And we got to keep in mind, artists are just artists for the most part. Most of them are simply artists. And that's not a disrespect because it's their music that we love. But that does not mean they are controlling anything that's going on in this industry.
So what about when we hear the voices of everybody seems like when you become an artist, you automatically get into become an entrepreneur. You're opening your own record company, right? I'm thinking of Rick Ross. I'm thinking of Jay-Z. I'm thinking of Meek Mill. Like you have these voices and they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to start my own record company. Does that not make an impact on how this culture should go?
Well, I think, you mentioned three people that I follow pretty well. To me, using my own discernment, I feel like I can tell who's in the business, who's doing business, and who's hustling. So hustling is hustling. Hustling, the end game usually for that is the dollar bill and stay relevant. Business can often have goals that are not necessarily obvious. And I think that, Jay-Z's a crafty cat, period. And I think he's always has been. And I think he's dealing with big business and he's dealing with people outside of us, obviously. And so, again, when I watch a hustle, I know a hustle. So a hustle means, again, it's about getting more money. It does not necessarily mean more power, though.
Or making a greater, or making more of an impact.
Sure. Again, especially when these guys talk, and you know how social media is, and a lot of these guys, especially you mentioned, especially Rick Ross, he's very entertaining. I've been in that house twice when it was Evander Holyfield's house. So that's how long I've been. So I understand where he, let's just say that land and that house, and I know where he is. Jermaine lived across the street from that area. Chris Kelly lived in the subdivision next to where Rick Ross. So I think it's interesting that Rick Ross is even in Atlanta. He's doing all these businesses since we're bringing them up. But again, let me back up too. I did a remix to Trick Daddy's In the Wind for his album, and I met Rick Ross back then before the beard. So I've seen him come a long way. Oh yeah. You gotta understand, I've been about a long time.
I know we got to take a break and you probably have to go. I want to know, are Black people still heading up hip hop culture? And I want to know, how do we get around the structures that you described? Is there a way for people who have that real grassroots, following where they're from, or that creativity that would really have an impact in terms of how the music makes you feel and the subject matters that we're listening to every day? Is there a way to get around this kind of the business structures that you described? Is it what we're talking about, independent labels? Is it streaming? And are Black people still heading up this culture?
That's now we're doing a break.
We got to do a break. I think we got to do breaks for Farajii. Poor Maddie's
but he can do it because I don't want to keep him too long. So can you put that answer in like a 30-second soundbite? Yes,
I do, because I'm part of what she just spoke of. I have M City Recordings, which is EMC, mcityworld.com. Something background. I'm sorry, but what I'm saying is yes, the beautiful part about the internet and everything we can do now in these day and time is you can put your own music out. You do not have to. The major route, it's not like you got a choice. The major route got to choose you, and you have to be willing to do what that is. I had a major record deal, 1998. It was amazing. It was great. It was brief, and because I'm still a musician, because I'm still a producer, I produce. I use the internet. I use everything I can, and I'm in radio, and I understand the limitations of radio. But there's no limitation to getting it to the people.
Okay.
That is. DJ Nabs, man, it has been a true honor, true privilege, a true blessing. How can people stay up to date with the work that you're doing as you're taking this culture forward and some of the activities you're going to be doing around this 50-year celebration?
So it's two websites. The one I mentioned before, mcityworld.com, emcity, C-I-T-Y world.com, and then nchipophistory.com, which is just the website we're developing to preserve the history of hip hop in Carolina, where I'm from.
There it is right there. DJ Nabs, legendary producer, DJ. I mean, he's just been doing a phenomenal work all in the industry, and more importantly for the culture. DJ Nabs, you are always welcome, brother, on this platform.
I appreciate y'all.
Please keep us up to date on anything that you're working on. But I thank you so much for the extra time you spent with us today here on the culture.
My pleasure. Thank you both.
A pleasure was ours.
Absolutely. Folks, we got to take another quick pause. When we come forward, let's talk a little bit about Dwayne Wade and more. Stay with us. It's the culture here on the Black Star Network.
Pull up a chair. Take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
I'm Farajii Muhammad, live from LA. And this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation. You and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together. So let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture. Weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Your money makes this possible. Check some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. For our final conversation, I want to bring my sister Suzette back into the frame here. Let's talk a little bit about Dwayne Wade, who we had a recent interview. And it seems like the Ways are always in the news, Suzette. I can't either.
They PR machine be working, though. They know how to stay relevant, bro.
All right. So a couple of things. I think that the last time, and I think that you and I had this conversation where Gabrielle Union talked about sharing expenses, going 50-50 on the expenses. Dwayne Wade, that was a couple of weeks ago. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Gabrielle Union, she crazy, blah, blah, blah. But Dwayne Wade came out, and a couple of days after she made that statement and explained the context for that. And one of the things that he said was, and this wasn't even what I wanted to talk about, but I just wanted to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
He said was that him and Gabrielle were having an argument. And in the middle of the argument, he said, this is my house. I pay for this.
And Gabby said, never again. I'm finna go half on this from not going. What you said, brother? Oh, okay.
So guess what? They said that they had the argument. Dwayne Wade said that was when we were living in Miami. When they moved to Los Angeles, She said, no, Negro. I'm paying for half. Because you will never say to me, this is your house.
Yeah. People still got a problem with it. Some people still disagree. Some people, I mean, it's their household. Let them do what works for them. I mean.
But I think you needed to say that because that gives a lot more context to the situation. But here's something he recently revealed in another conversation when he was talking about the landmark moment when his daughter Zaya came out to him as transgender. He talked about the fact that he was not prepared for that conversation, and more importantly, that Zaya, his daughter, actually hid from him when she was going to make that announcement about who she was. And so I wanted to share this very quickly because I think this speaks to the challenges of parenting in 2023. Hey, take a look at this, folks. This is coming from NBC News when Dwayne Wade was talking about his daughter Zaya. He said, quote, when asked about that landmark moment that Zaya came out to him as transgender, Dwayne Wade said he was prepared for years for his child to come out in some fashion after she decided herself as gay on a school assignment at the age of 8. So he said, so I came home and I just remember my child being scared to talk to me, like hiding in my wife's arms in a chair. He said, I think I'm this dad that's like, hey, come and tell me anything. I'm a cool dad. And he said, and it was fear in my child's face to tell me. And so I had to check myself. I had to go look myself in the mirror and ask myself, why was my child scared to tell me something about herself? And a lot of work as parents and as people, what we do is we put our fears and everything on our kids. And I guess I was doing that. So I had to go look myself in the mirror and ask myself, what is it about my masculinity that has my child afraid? This is Dwayne Wade with his daughter Zaya. Is it Zaya or Zaya? Am I saying that correctly?
I think it's Zaya Wade. Yeah, I think you're saying it right.
Yeah, Zaya. So the reason I think this is kind of an interesting part of the discussion is because I think that, he caught a lot of flack. The Wade family has caught a lot of flack around this issue. They moved from Florida because they were afraid that for their daughter's life and being in that environment. But the big thing that I gleaned from this, Suzette, is in 2023, parenting is very, very different, very challenging. It is so hard. But the thing that I've learned early on, especially as a parent, regardless of what your children is, if you're a decent parent, you're going to accept your child for who they are. Now, unless they're completely, and I'm saying, of course, with some boundaries, right? If they're not like a mass murderer or something of that nature. But I think that when I read this, it just struck home because it's like, regardless of what your child grows up to be or who they may be right now, you're going to love them. I think as a decent parent, you're going to make an effort to love them. And it doesn't have to be because they came out as part of the LGBTQ community. It could be something very simple, like they may not go to the same school that you and your parents' parents and your parents' parents go to. They may not want to be associated with the same religion. It's about accepting your children for who they are, because essentially they are a different person. That's a different human being that you produce, but that they're going to have to find their own path in life. What's your take on this, Suzette?
Well, not being a parent yet, praise be to God.
Not being a parent yet.
I don't want to speak too boldly because I know, like what you're saying is true, that it is a difficult road now, especially with such complex issues as the one that we've seen presented by the transition of Zaya Wade and the support that Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union have shown unconditionally for their daughter. Now, there are people that are going to take issue, Farajii, with the very premise that love means that you have to accept, right? There is, especially within the Black community, the context around, religion and whether God, quote, is okay with different forms of sexuality. I think that's like kind of the elephant in the room when we talk about this, when it concerns our community. So they're a powerful example. And again, some people are with it. Some people are very, very opposed to, the Wade's, the way I've seen it voiced on social media is that that Zaya Wade is too young. I think that's the biggest, or one of the arguments I've seen of people who are pushing back against this level of acceptance and love. But I think, Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union are doing an impeccable job of at least telling their story, and in an open way. Some people would say sometimes too open, because every other week they're in the news and sharing their business and keeping us kind of like, do we really need to know this? But this one particularly, I think, is a powerful example of a man who probably wasn't raised to think of their child within this type of realm of possibility. And to know that, he was kind of moved by, what in the heck? My child is like running scared from me. And what does that say about me? What does that say about masculinity? What does it say about our relationship? And how he wanted it to be different. So I do think, for whatever people feel about whether, there's an age piece there, I think transgender people are probably the least understood of the LGBTQ plus community. So there are a lot of questions and misinformation and misnomers about why people are transgendered and how that comes about. So I think it's a powerful example, especially as a Black couple, of them putting themselves out there. And again, they've received, a lot of support as well. But there's this kind of this duality, especially in the Black community, of how not everybody is as accepting of a child who is going through this type of identity transition. And I'm grateful that they're at least talking about it, so that more people can at least chew on and have some different perspective from their own, presented to them about how, parenting can look for folks who are dealing with this type of issue.
And very quickly, I mean, you have to. I mean, parenting, there's no guidebook, quote unquote. There's no manual to it. You don't know what type of person your child is going to be. I remember having a conversation just recently with my dad, talking to him about, my son. And he was like, well, son, you need to. And I was like, Pop, that's old school, man. Like, you can't just be like, if you don't listen, I'm going to whip your ass.
We were told what to do. There was no question.
That's what I'm saying. But see, today's generation, yes, you got to have that. And I'm not saying that you don't need to have that hardcore discipline. But is it better to empower the child to help them to understand understand the thinking behind the parents? And I think from our generation, Suzanne, we didn't get that. It was like, well, why do I need to do this? Don't question an adult. You just listen. And I get that. Trust and believe. I get that. But I do think that part of the missing piece in that parenting model is the fact of helping me to understand your view as my parent. So that way I can truly internalize it. That way I don't have to be told. It just comes on automatically. Like, my mom wouldn't want me to do this because she's saying that this might not be safe. Or my dad wouldn't want me to do this because this might happen. You want to set up, and I'm, again, this is just me, folks, but I would think you would want to set up in your child an internal monitor so that way they can regulate themselves. Instead of setting up a situation where they have to ask you for every little thing. They can grow into their independence, right? Because they know the why behind the decisions. And I have to keep that in mind for my son. It's like, here's why I'm telling you to do A, B, and C, so he can connect the dots and be like, oh, okay, I get it. Because that why was never explained to me. It was just like, shut up and listen and do what I tell you.
Yeah, I think you're pointing out some nuances in parenting, because I think, and I know we're out of time, but oversimplification in my mind of what there's kind of an evolving view. And maybe for some, it's not even evolving, because I feel like there are people who believe strongly that your children belong to you and are a reflection of you, and therefore should espouse and believe and adhere to your culture or your views, your identities, if you were for them. And there's another group, and again, there's a lot of nuance in between, that is more like your children belong, to themselves and to the world, in terms of your and almost like a coach in a sense. And again, past a certain age, not in the early stages, but especially as they become teenagers and kind of become, who they are meant to be, or gain a knowledge of self, more so helping them to usher into their own identities and what they want for themselves, etc. I think there's, a few ways in which people have differences in how they want to approach child rearing. So this is always, kind of complicated, but your points are well taken, that oftentimes we have to step back and ask ourselves why we're doing what we're doing with our kids, and where did it come from? Did it just come from your granddaddy and your daddy and everybody else was doing it?
Yep.
And so this is the culture of how we raise kids. And is it good for us, and is it good for the child? We got to ask those questions.
Big question. Suzette, always a pleasure to have you joining us on Wednesdays. I look forward to the conversations that we have. And I even look forward to the debates, honestly. I'll be like, let me find out where I can just get under Suzette's skin real quick.
No, I love it. It's healthy discourse, which we need. We need to hear from
much.
one another, and the differences of opinion make it, juicy, as well as it's a learning opportunity. So I appreciate that too, Farajii.
Absolutely. Suzette Speaks. You can find her on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to her channel. Go to her show. Check out her show. She has a dynamic show, wonderful guests, great topics. And you can also check her out, of course, here on Wednesdays, here on The Culture, here on the Black Star Network. Suzette, you're doing a hell of a job, and you're always good for the culture. So thank you again.
Thank you for a wonderful conversation, everybody. I really enjoyed it. See y'all next week.
Absolutely. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us. I thank each and every one of you for being a part of the discussion. Big shout out to my culture crew. Big shout out to our very special guest, DJ Navs, and of course to my team, Maddie, Keenan, Joel, and of course my control room. Folks, make sure you do your due diligence. Continue to support us here at Black Star Network. Go to our website today, blackstarnetwork.com. Download the app for free. Follow us on social media at Black Star Network on IG, Twitter, and Facebook. And while you're on social media, make sure you hit me up at The Real Farajii on IG, and Farajii on Twitter. And I got a couple of more slots for you on Facebook at Farajii Muhammad. But thank you for your continued support. Stay tuned. Up next is Roland Martin Unfiltered at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As always, never be afraid to challenge what's wrong. Stand for what's right while being yourself in the process. God willing, we will talk tomorrow for another exciting edition of The Culture right here, exclusively here, only here on the Black Star Network. Talk to you soon. Peace.